I'm going to turn on, we've got record on, and just going to back up for one moment here, guys. Bear with me for just 1 second. All right. Well, it doesn't want to give me, yeah, all right. I'm not going to worry about that today. Okay. Ah, there it is. Ha, that's what I was waiting for. Okay, super. It's about 12:05, so I think maybe we can get rolling, and it's nice to see everybody, and thank you for being here today. And I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what the agenda is for today, and then we'll roll forward. Does that sound okay with everybody?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to do, we have a little housekeeping section on our agenda. And then we're going to spend most of our time with today's topic, which is traditional knowledge, and it's hosted by Jessica and Julie, and we have a guest with us, Rachel Daniel. So this is going to be really great. And this, for the second cohort, Jessica and Julie have been working on this and trying to bring this conversation forward since last winter, right? I think it was in our February gathering here in Anchorage. Okay, so I don't want to burn up too much time on check-in, but maybe we could just go around and everyone just brief few thoughts on being here today and today's topic. And maybe we'll just start with we'll start with Mark.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see everybody. Get reconnected. As far as me, I'm a little overwhelmed. I'm just getting back from my fishing season, which was a really good season. It's been it's had a lot of fun. Had a lot of great and interesting people on the boat. As far as the reading, this I had to read this paper a couple times. It's very interesting, but it's kind of out of my wheelhouse as far as the terminology. I learned some new terms in there too, so that's good when you learn something new, right? So, but I'm looking forward to the discussion about this. One of the things that I've noticed over the years is that there seems to me more inclusivity of all stakeholders when we're looking at fisheries related issues. So I'm really looking forward to this topic today and learning more about that.
Thank you. Marcus.
I am thankful for getting to be a part of this presentation today.
Super. Donna.
I'm also thankful to be part of this conversation, and it translates over into the work that I do. We're doing outreach to Exxon Valdez oil spill affected communities, and that includes not just going out into the scientists telling people in the community, here's the latest in science. It's actually having an exchange of information. And what have you observed? Do you have questions we can answer? Do we have questions that you can answer because you live in this community and you see things on a daily basis? So anything that I can do to improve my ability to do that, I'm very excited about.
Super. Katie.
Yeah, kind of the same as Mark. I'm just getting back from Bristol Bay and kind of getting flooded with town stuff. But also very interested in the topic, enjoyed reading the paper. I have a long history of working with experiential education and went to a couple alternative schools myself. My kids went to a couple, and so really interested in alternative ways of education. So looking forward to the conversation.
Kevin.
Hey, delighted to be here. I'm in the middle of UAS convocation on a sunny day, and fun to check out from those meetings and come to this one. So good to see everybody.
Matt.
It's Matt.
Oh, sorry, Matt Rafferty. Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm looking at you.
Echoing the sentiments there. Just excited to learn. Happy to be here. Thanks.
The other Matt.
Glad to be here. Good seeing everybody.
Stephanie.
Yeah, excited to get back into things after running a successful campaign. Woohoo! And yeah, ready to get back in the swing of things and excited for the topic today.
Michelle.
Hey, it's good to see everyone's face. Happy to be here and very excited about the discussion today. And that's it.
Francis.
It's great to see everybody's faces. I got to see a few people at Salmon Fest, which was great. And yesterday I got together with Angelie from the first cohort, as well as Kelly from the second, because Kelly is down in Juneau, and we hung out and chatted about salmon. And I'm really stoked because today I just started, it was the first commencement of a women in fishing group that I just started up. And it's women who are running organizations like I am, that are you know, working in the fishing industry, but run by women. And we talked a lot about salmon, so that was really exciting, and I've got some great things to share with you guys at a later time about that. And I'm really excited to participate in here today.
Brooke.
Hi everybody, happy to see everyone's faces and interested in today's topic. Thank you.
Warren.
Good afternoon, everybody. Looking forward to today's conversation. Good to see everybody. I don't know what else to say.
Marcus.
So this is my but thanks again.
Sorry, Marcus. Okay. I'm going to go to Rayette. Are you there, R?
I am. Hello, everyone. Happy to see you. I have to pop out a little bit early because I have another meeting, but I am looking forward to the discussion and from hearing your conversation.
And who, other than Jessica and Julie and Rachel, who else, who we missed, who might be on the phone?
Charlie's on the phone.
Hey, Charlie, how are you?
Excellent. How about you?
Great. Glad to hear your voice.
You too.
And I think Ben's on the phone.
Yep, I am. Is it my turn? I've been in and out here.
Yeah, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, I had a real busy summer. We took a shot at the summer fish camp. Got a few fish, and wasn't enough, but man, it's some, and we're incredibly grateful for it. Family had a great time getting out there around the campfire, and that was busy. Got back to the office and did not skip the beat, just kept on cruising. And right now I'm actually running to the airport to head down to Kenai to visit with Mr. Geese.
That sounds good. Did I miss anybody else?
Yeah, it's Werner. I'm just really glad to be part of the discussion, and I'm really proud of the work of Jessica, and Julie. They've been great. I'm glad to have worked with them and looking forward to it. Thanks.
Super. Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer. Is this kind of check-in time? I got on a little late.
Yeah, it is. Who's that?
Charlie.
Hey, Charlie.
I like to do a little check-in myself if I can.
Please do.
Butt in. Okay, well, as you all know, I was down in Cordova with Haley at the science camp. It was a wonderful experience. Really, really good people. A little hospitable. Had a great trip. Weather was good. It was raining a little bit when we first got there. Then for the day of the science camp, it cleared up. Got to do a bunch of things with the kids outside instead of hide from the rain. We talk a lot about salmon. It was really fun. They were really into it. It was kind of a diverse group, which was really awesome. Got to hear a little bit of different perspective from most all of them. Got to teach them how to fillet fish and all about fish and eggs and how to determine the life when they're expected to hit their streams and how far they're going to swim by the size of their eggs. So we had a lot of fun, and it was really good to see different country and different river and different system. I look forward to more and look forward to hearing the conversation today.
Thanks, Charlie. And I just wanted to make one introduction before we hand it over to Jessica, Julie, and Rachel. So sitting with me is Knock, and she's been a longtime member of the forum staff. She works with our education program. And as of September 1st, she's going to be joining the leadership team with Rayette and I. And you guys will see her in Kodiak for sure. She's got a little more education work to do in September, but she will be present with us starting in October, and we're very excited. So thank you, Noah.
Happy to be here.
And then I'll just put on your radar in the month of September, as we get ready for Kodiak, you may be hearing from another one of our colleagues here at the forum, and that's Simonetta, and she's going to be helping us with logistics. So if you get an email or a phone call from Simonetta, that's who she is. And very quickly, our next salmon crossing is September 18th, and Marcus is going to be hosting that. And he's going to be sharing with us a little bit of his system map that he's been working on. The Kodiak dates, and I will email these to you, but the first cohort, your arrival day is Tuesday, October 9th, and your departure day is the morning of Saturday, October 13th. For the second cohort, your arrival day is Thursday, October 11th, and your departure day is at the end of the day on Monday, October 15th. And also I wanted to remind you guys that please, if you have an interest, so Marcus happened to sort of express an interest in hosting a salmon crossing, as are Julie and Jessica, and that's always available to you guys. And so if you have an interest, please let me know. You know, that's ideally, the salmon crossings are driven by you guys and your interests and what you have to share with everybody. And okay, so I don't want to take up any more time. I'm going to hand off to Julie and Jessica and our guest Rachel. So thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Jennifer. Jessica, did you want to say anything before I introduced Rachel?
No, just glad everybody could be here, and look forward to our presentation and discussion to follow.
Great, so welcome everybody. For those of you in the second cohort that may not know me, my name is Julie Raymond Jacobian. I live in Girdwood. I'm an anthropologist. I work for Kodiak Incorporated, which is the Alaska Native nonprofit for the Bering Strait region. And my work at Kodiak focuses on collaborating with the 20 tribes in our region to do things like document traditional knowledge, do fisheries-related advocacy work, and a variety of other things. And it's through that work that I came to know Rachel. Rachel works for the Pew Charitable Trust in their Arctic program, and we've collaborated over the years on a variety of different things, but a lot of salmon and fisheries related work. We're currently with some other colleagues doing work on co-production of knowledge, models and concerns related to research across Alaska, but particularly in Western Alaska. And Rachel is super, super knowledgeable about all things fisheries related and marine mammal related and a variety of other things, policy and analysis. And I'm super excited that she agreed to spend some time with us today to specifically talk about her knowledge and experience related to traditional knowledge. And so, Jennifer, I don't know if it's easier for you to pull up Rachel's PowerPoint and then just have Rachel say next slide, or what's the easiest thing to do?
I think that might be the easiest way to go, just because my computer is a little squirrely.
Okay, so Rachel has a presentation for us with a PowerPoint, and then after that, we'll have time for questions and discussion. And Jessica and I prepared a few questions in case you guys are feeling shy or not sure what to say. So why don't you test out your audio, Rachel? I don't think I've heard you yet.
Can you hear me?
Yep, great.
Awesome, great.
So go ahead and introduce yourself, and Jennifer can pull up your PowerPoint while you're chatting.
Well, I want to thank you for the invitation to share my perspective on traditional knowledge and my experiences in applying it, to research, resource management, and policy. And again, I also appreciate the rescheduling this session from March and your understanding and accommodating all of the challenges with airline cancellations and travel issues. So a big thank you to you all for accommodating that. And earlier this spring, I also provided a bunch of reading material, and I think that might be on your share drive, and I encourage you to go back and read a couple of things, and I'll refer to those, throughout the talk, and especially there's a couple of really good ones in there. And then also thanks to Jessica, Julie, for also providing, some additional resources in advance of this call. And so, today, I'm going to be starting out with a brief overview of some of the important components of traditional knowledge. And then I'll touch on considerations for applying traditional knowledge to research in natural resource management and policy. And then there are 3 examples that I want to cover before we start our discussion. And I'm also trying to figure out how to view the how to actually view the screen that shows the presentation myself.
Yeah, we can't quite see it yet.
Okay.
You had it up before, Jennifer. I could
Can
see
you
it.
not see it?
No, I could see it when we logged in, but I'm not seeing it now.
Rhea, can you see the screen?
No. Let's see.
Hang on one second. Top. Okay. I think it just worked out. Okay.
There you go.
Now you guys can see it, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you could just make it full screen.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay.
You may have to click that enable editing button at the top.
Yep.
It's in that yellow bar.
Yeah. My fear is if I do this.
There you go, perfect.
Awesome.
Okay. Let's see if it doesn't get away from us, but we'll try it.
Okay, so if you could go to the next slide. And then that was just the overview that I talked about, and a little sneak peek of the 3 examples that I want to share. And actually one of them is something that Julie's actually going to talk about because it's such a great study, and that's the Bering Strait Current study. And so if you could go to the next slide. So what is traditional knowledge? Traditional knowledge is a knowledge system that systematically explains and holds an understanding of the environment around us. And it has a different way of knowing than our prevailing knowledge system, that we all share today in larger society. So it's a way of knowing that goes beyond observations. And so when I say observations, I mean things like the timing of migrations of species, recording of temperatures, documentation of species, or occurrences of disease in fish or marine mammals. So if you could go to the next slide. So traditional knowledge is a body of knowledge that includes practices and beliefs, as well as physical, chemical, biological systems. And so it recognizes that all of these systems are interwoven. And together, all of these individual systems are an integral part of the overall connected system. This connectivity across all of these systems is a really important aspect to traditional knowledge. And the relationships within the system, connecting the different systems, connecting the biological system, the beliefs and practices. So all those in-between connections are equally as important as all of those individual systems themselves. And so if you could go to the next slide. And so here's another, so I've showed you one conceptualization that's actually from a paper that Julie wrote on applying traditional knowledge to fisheries council processes, and is one of the papers that was included in the reading earlier this spring. And this is another conceptualization. And this, is an illustration that shows knowledge about the ecosystem. So knowledge about, different species. And then it also includes like sharing knowledge, about species or about processes in this system. But it also includes knowledge informing practices. And it also shows and includes relationships people have with the environment. And so for a second, I'd like to take a moment to point out the importance of the practice of reciprocity. And so when we say reciprocity, we're usually referring to a two-way exchange for mutual benefit. And in everyday practice, we tend to think of, traditional practices of sharing knowledge or experiences, and even like food, with other people. But in this context, it also encompasses these practices, and extends to reciprocity across and between systems. So from people to animals and vice versa. And so another common expression, that I've heard and that I've heard growing up is talking about our relationship to the land. And, I oftentimes use that terminology myself, and, will quite often get corrected by lawyers or policy people. And I know that I've heard others have the same experience as well, and for us, that land is a more all-encompassing term, right? It's land and waters, or the environment, the world, and our universe, right? That's what we envision and see. And so this whole concept of language is also very important in traditional knowledge, right? It encodes our way, of seeing our world and, for seeing those connections. So language is central. So this, so far all told, gets at the heart of kind of what we mean by, traditional knowledge, holding this holistic view. And if you could go to the next slide, please. In addition to the other, conceptual models, I like to show what it means in practice and visualization, because I think that that's really important, especially today. We need to be able to share and express what we mean and how it translates to everyday life. And so traditional knowledge is a cumulative body of knowledge. It's multi-generational. It's handed down from generation to generation. It's developed over millennia, and it's actually continually developing today. And I think that this, really speaks towards the resilience over time and our ability to adapt over time. And so on that note, it's important to note that it's not antiquated, right? This knowledge is continually developing, in present time. traditional knowledge is also very systematic. It's based on evidence acquired through direct experience, through catching the fish, through processing the fish, through watching it dry, through tasting it, eating it. Transmission of knowledge associated with cultural practice too. And that includes life lessons, skills, and how we share those over time and space, during periods of mourning, during periods of rebirth. It's all interwoven into, how we live our everyday lives. If you could advance to the next slide, that'd be great. And so I think that traditional knowledge can be place-based. People are part of the environment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that only knowledge, where people may physically be located, is pertinent. So it's ecosystem-based, system-wide as well. And I think that, in my experience, this is one of the most difficult concepts to get across to scientists or natural resource managers and policymakers. And, I return to this figure to show the scope, of the area that this knowledge encompasses. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. And so I want to next go into, some of the important considerations, now that you have an idea of what I mean by what traditional knowledge means, what some of the important considerations are, for applying it, for research, natural resource management, and policy. And so I think it's worth sharing, some of my personal experiences. And I'm all too often very hesitant, to widely and publicly share a lot of my personal views and experiences, whether it's for fear of being personally attacked, for fear of information being misused, or for fear of it being, used, against the need to ensure traditional knowledge, is maintained. However, over, the most recent years, I feel it's really important, to share, these experiences and some of the challenges in order to move forward. It's important to understand also where we came from. And so I hope that you take away a better understanding, of the need to be thoughtful and deliberate, when applying traditional knowledge. And so the next section, that's, my main aim to get across. And so I grew up in Tututuliak, which is located at the mouth of the Kuskokwim River and Bering Sea, kind of like right there on the map. And where I grew up is very important because it shapes my worldview. But also, the time during which I grew up has been equally impactful. And so I grew up during a period of rapid colonization, rapid globalization. But more recently, I've also experienced and seen a time of positive change and growing empowerment. And I think somebody during the introduction, kind of mentioned and talked about this and talked about, fisheries being more inclusive. And so I've seen some of that, moving towards the positive change. And then I hope to, build off from that on some of the examples here in a minute. But first, I'll give you a little bit of the history though. So my grandma, Bayuk, in the picture there, and my grandfather, Ilokak, were both grew up in my same region. And I'm named after Alok, which is my grandma's dad, and Ray, which is the son of my two grandparents. And so that's, that's who I am. I'm like a seal hunter and a fisher person. And so my grandfather was the first in his family to actually have a real last name. And his brother and he were both separated when they were youth and, divided by different religions. And so they have different last names and reside in different communities. And then my parents, my mother actually is from the lower 48 and came up to Alaska as a school teacher for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And she met my dad, and this was in the 1960s. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs learned about their relationship, and they immediately told her to cease or she would be fired. So she left, she quit. And she stayed with my dad. and remained, in my village and learned our traditions and customs. But I think that gives you a sense of that, the time, how it was very, very different, and the different challenges that you face, in, being an Indigenous person, and, not only having to learn new systems, new values, but also being taught that your values and your ways of life, weren't as good. And so this scenario played out, on a much wider scale, through Christianity, education, and the regulatory and policy system. And so this framework in which we're expected to succeed wasn't shaped by our values and our knowledge system. So when I talk about frameworks, this means, overarching governance and regulatory processes that we live by today. So like Western concepts for the management of health or child welfare, natural resource management, and education, to name a few. If you could go to the next slide. And so I actually moved to Washington, D.C. to work on tribal climate change policy. And so I've seen a lot of protesters, and I was like, wow, okay, this is an interesting slide, an interesting protest slide, and I think that, and I wanted to use it here just to illustrate the point that, a lot of these processes, have been brought on, a lot of Indigenous communities that don't include, or, purposely might actually include Indigenous ways of being and knowing. And so I think that some of the reading material provided by the organizers highlight this as it applies to like the education system and its, connectivity to our knowledge system, and provides some ways, how we might address a lot of these, challenges by these, for lack of a better word, Western frameworks. And so today, what I'm hoping to start, as we move into the examples, is to extend this to science and natural resource management to show all the challenges. And then I would like to, ensure that we talk about some of the examples as positive ways to move forward. If you could go to the next slide. Most of you have probably heard about the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And an example I'd like to use here is the MMPA. It was authorized in 1972 and underwent a whole reauthorization period in the mid-1990s that included actually a section on Section 19, section on co-management of marine mammals. And so as an undergraduate, one of my projects when I was in school studying marine mammals was to do a literature review on co-management at that time. And this was to help inform a lot of the agencies and agreements between hunters and agencies. And so this was back in the 90s, mind you. But the main body of work came from all the same scholars. And there's very little like Indigenous authorship or even community-based work. There's a lot of community-based work done today, but a lot of the references were primarily about Indigenous systems and Indigenous ways of knowing that were authored by scholars, right, from the outside. And so as these agreements are set up, not only were they set up by these governance frameworks, that of how a bill passes through Congress, and that's done so remotely in Washington, D.C., but they're also largely informed, by Western science. And so there's a need, for this process to include Indigenous knowledge. And as a side note, I'm just kind of taking a little meander here. On your reading list, I also included a podcast from TBC Unreserved that talks about like Indigenous knowledge in academia that touches on some of these points, and and it's something that's actually done really well in plain language. And so if you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend either reading that transcript or listening to the interviews, because some of these concepts I won't touch on here right now, but I think they're very important in bringing science and traditional knowledge together. But quite often traditional knowledge, comes from an academic resource that's usually cited by the same author as 20 years ago. And so again, as I said, there's a need for resource management to equitably include traditional knowledge with science. So could you go to the next slide? So how do we work towards incorporating and building equity? And one thing right off the bat, traditional knowledge should be respected and valued as its own knowledge system. And, it's different from science, and it's important to recognize that. And we'd like to work toward a mutual understanding. So part of this is knowing, what it is and what it's not. And I started off describing kind of what it is. And I'd like to provide an example, of something that I often get confused with, and that's local knowledge. Local knowledge is something, that is usually associated with Western world views and often fisheries management concepts. And I think, local knowledge is very important and very valuable as well. But it's also important, not to confuse the two. It's also important to recognize sovereign rights of Indigenous peoples over their own knowledge. And more specifically, that knowledge holders and communities should have some authority in how data and information are shared. As we all understand that there are a lot of proprietary data out there, whether it's, industry or the state or contracting companies, we all, have come across, data that we can't necessarily access. And the other way to build equity is through capacity building. Could you advance to the next slide? And so to know the whole system, you need both Western science and traditional knowledge. And this together, this new knowledge will inform good decision making. In that light, I encourage moving, away from viewing traditional knowledge to support science or, using science to validate traditional knowledge. Science is quite specific when referenced, and similarly, traditional knowledge holds its own methodologies and evaluation systems. Also, by taking only one worldview at hand, you might miss out on something. It's important to understand some of the connections that offer from a traditional knowledge view. And you may not see that when you're looking at something like risk, or threats. And I think this is very valuable, especially when you're looking at something like an EIS or an EA and that whole process. And there are so many times that a lot of connections, are overlooked. Also, ethically, bringing the different knowledge systems on the same plane also brings to level the playing field. It also works to build equity, what we talked about earlier. If you could advance to the next slide. So one of the most important factors in working with traditional knowledge and knowledge holders, is fostering relationships, and working toward true partnerships. It is important to understand that Indigenous peoples live in, complex social and governance systems, and leveraging existing Indigenous networks, institutions, and organizations is very important. And it's also important to understand, what does partnership mean from an Indigenous worldview? Not necessarily participating like in a workshop or, attending a meeting, means that it's true participation. It's really important to, understand what that might mean from an Indigenous worldview. And next slide. Whoops. Go back to the last one. This is going into the examples now. I kind of missed putting in a slide in there, but I wanted to say that there's a need to move beyond, just translating, incorporating, and integrating traditional knowledge and Western science, and more towards bridging knowledge systems. And this accommodates multiple perspectives and provides for a two-way exchange of understanding. And let's see, was it earlier in the presentation? I think Donna was talking about the, need for an exchange of information, that having that two-way exchange, is really important. And, you might miss out again on, opportunity to learn different facets or to include different people and work at building relationships. And so Julie mentioned this at the very beginning, and it's something that, I really wanted to put a slide in here, but I forgot as I was nearing the end of working on this presentation. But one way for moving forward is to look at a co-production of knowledge approach. There's not time to go into all the details here today, but again, as Julie mentioned, we're both working with Carolina Behe from ICC Alaska on, building a model of what that looks like and some of the important, considerations there. And, and so a co-production approach, brings together different knowledge systems to create both new knowledge and a better understanding of the environment around us, through a transparent and equitable process, versus a multidisciplinary approach, which is bringing together like biology, oceanography, science, and even social science, right? Because sometimes, social scientists might take a Western world view versus being deliberate and intentional about their process, for, looking at the information that they're also learning. A co-production approach also underscores the role and value of different knowledge systems and the different methodologies, that get at this new information. Issues are identified collaboratively, person to person in plain language. And Indigenous people have a substantial leadership role in the conception and project management. We're used to having like one lead PI who just goes, and gets other people from other disciplines to join on to a project. But what we're talking about is more starting from the beginning and working through a project. And so if you could go on to the next slide. And so there are three examples now, like to transition, from kind of what I talked about, what traditional knowledge is and means to me, to some of the important considerations about how you might work with traditional knowledge, or how you might, use traditional knowledge, in policy, resource management, or research. There are three examples here that we kind of would like to talk a little bit about what they are, and then kind of why they're important. And so the first one is this very cool example from Nunavut in Labrador. And there's a link, and I encourage you to look at it too while we're talking here. But it's a climate adaptation tool, that brings together traditional knowledge of sea ice, with advanced data gained from, GIS type observing technology. And so bringing these two types of knowledge together to create a new product, that helps, hunters, industry, and shippers in navigating the environment. And so it's seen as bolstering traditional knowledge rather than replacing it, because even though, you might have this product that shows the different types of ice, you can't solely navigate this environment, based on this tool alone. You still need to understand the ice, the weather, how it changes over the winter, all those different pieces. But this is, a really cool tool that helps. So why is it important? This is a really cool tool that helps build capacity. Inuit hunters do a lot of the field work. So they're taking buoys, placing them out on the ice, and then that information on snow depth and ice depth is sent, remotely. And then the information from the satellite, is extended over the entire region, and they're able to build these maps using Indigenous knowledge about the different types of ice that are important to Inuit hunters. And so it's bridging these two knowledge systems to create this new product. And another reason that it's important is that the connectivity is valued. And so like when I'm saying connectivity, it's being able to go hunting and having those relationships, not only with the environment, but teaching young hunters how to hunt, young hunters how to read the ice. And those young hunters then are also learning this new knowledge, about reading the GIS maps, reading the remote sensing data that's received from satellites, and bringing the two together. And so there's a great mutual understanding by scientists and knowledge holders, on the value of what they're doing. And the other thing that this provides is, how it's very specific to, this place, this region. It also provides a model and a framework, for other, collaborations. And so it stresses and highlights, the process. If you could go to the next slide. I think this is where Julie's taking over for a second.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. My generator is just kicked on. Is it too loud?
No, I think we can hear you.
Okay. I was trying to figure out a way to turn it off, but I can't. Rachel, did you want me to talk about this now? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Do you, or if you can't, I won't do as good a job as you, but I can if you want me
as long as the generator isn't overpowering my voice. Yeah. So thanks, Rachel. Just briefly, I'll talk about this project, which was a project with the villages of Diomede, Shishmaref, and Wales in the Bering Strait region to document their community's knowledge about ocean currents mainly, but also other features of the marine environment. And this project was initiated for a variety of reasons, but one was concern over increased ship traffic going through the Bering Strait. And these three communities in particular wanting to make sure that in the event of an oil spill or ship grounding or some other maritime disaster, that there would be, their knowledge about ocean currents and how they operate would be available to responders and agencies and others. Another motivation behind the project was, cultural preservation, to document this knowledge for future generations. People felt as though many elders were passing away that had much of this knowledge and wanted to make sure it was documented in some form. And so we worked with these three communities. We developed a map. Actually, these may be in the portal, but I'm not sure. But I just posted 2 links to a report and a booklet that we produced from this project. We worked with these three communities to develop both a map and a narrative report describing their knowledge of ocean currents in the Bering Strait. And as part of this project, once we had done the majority of the work with communities, we invited several Western scientists, oceanographers, and physical scientists to come and have a workshop with our ocean currents experts in Nome to share knowledge. And so we held this workshop, which was really exciting and productive. We had our ocean currents experts, we had our Western scientists. They gave presentations to each other about the knowledge that they had about these different systems, and talked about the ways that their knowledge systems overlapped, about ways that they could fill gaps in each other's knowledge, and talked about ways that the communities, the traditional knowledge holders, and Western scientists could potentially work together and move forward in the future to gain an even bigger understanding of these systems. And one of the important things that came out of that experience for people, I think, was that, Rachel mentioned a few minutes ago that only looking at something, at a system, at an ecosystem, from one perspective, you might miss things. And that was really borne out in this experience of ocean currents and sharing knowledge. There were a variety of things that the Western scientists were kind of like, whoa, blew their mind, that these hunters and boat captains and others knew about ocean currents that scientists had no idea about. And vice versa, there were things about bottom currents, for example, deep in the ocean that hunters weren't really aware of, that the scientists were able to share with them. And they kind of, there were all these connections that were made for everyone involved about how this system works. And I think everyone came out with a deeper understanding of how the system works, and just like a real desire to continue to try and work together to develop that even more. And maybe just one other brief thing I'll say about this. Rachel was talking about traditional knowledge and how it's a system and has all these different components that are part of it that go beyond, the biological, that often people talk about traditional ecological knowledge, for example. And this project was a really beautiful example of that, I think, because our primary intent was to talk about ocean currents, where they are, how they operate, seasonality, what that means for people doing subsistence activities and traveling in the region, where materials may end up on shore if they're in the water. But through those conversations and discussions, the hunters and boat captains and others that were involved were able to paint this extremely complex picture of their knowledge system from the starting point of ocean currents. And by that I mean things like talking about, why are people out on the ocean to begin with? Hunting, for example, is one reason why. And the kind of knowledge that it requires beyond just ocean currents to even, think about putting a boat in the water in the Bering Strait region. Knowledge of weather, knowledge of animal behavior, all sorts of things. And from that came a discussion of, what it meant to be a boat captain. How do you select a crew? How do you work with a crew and train with a crew? All the relationships that are involved with that. Kinship relations and other relationships, which led to discussions of how knowledge is passed from a boat captain or another hunter to younger men or women who are involved in hunting. What the sharing practices are once an animal has been harvested, what the spiritual practices around harvesting and sharing that animal might be. So starting from the point of, it might look very straightforward, ocean currents, where are they, how fast are they, how do they operate? This whole system is illuminated around that one concept. And so, if you're interested in that more, or taking a look at the map, I encourage you to go check out those links there, and happy to talk about it more with anyone if you'd like. So, thanks, Rachel. You still there, Rachel? I see her icon, but I don't hear her.
Is she still there? But we don't hear you, Rachel.
Maybe she's muted. I wonder if you can unmute her, Jennifer.
Yeah, I think.
Because I see her.
Oh, there she is.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I accidentally hung up on you when I was trying to unmute myself. So sorry about that. And you advanced the slide, so thanks. And thanks, Julie, for sharing that really great example of bringing new knowledge, using traditional knowledge and science to get a better understanding that can be applied to a lot of different important decision-making processes. And so the last example here that I'd like to speak about is the establishment of the Northern Bering Sea Climate Resilience Area, and I've sent everyone also a link in the chat box about this. And I think that I've saved the best for last because this speaks towards how policy can advance some of the solutions. And I think that policy is one of the most challenging and complex, places to include traditional knowledge, worldview, and values, right? Because you're trying to enter a system, that has specific ways of operating and specific, ways of, getting policies through. And this particular one was a result of a policy, of the White House in 2016. And it's all about and a lot of it is about the process, right? So a lot of it's about, how this place was established. And, I've had the benefit of knowing, some of the government perspective and, knowing some of the indigenous perspective. And I think that, a really important part of this, is like the education of administrative and agency officials and bringing together, traditional knowledge holders and government officials in a collaborative process. And I that link I just sent you actually includes a whole section on including traditional knowledge in decision making. I mean, a whole section. It's a paragraph, but it's a small paragraph that was, quite a feat. And it reads that it shall be the policy of the United States to recognize and value the participation of Alaska Native tribal governments in decisions affecting the Northern Bering Sea climate resilience area, and for all agencies to consider traditional knowledge in decisions affecting the Northern Bering Sea climate resilience area. Specifically, all agencies shall consider applicable information from the Bering Intergovernmental Tribal Advisory Council in the exercise of existing agency authority. Such input may be received through existing agency procedures and consultation processes. And so I think that this was a really, important result, and has a precedent. And I feel like this is one way, where traditional knowledge, can influence decision making through a policy, whether it's, put upon, like this, an executive order from the administrative side of government, but also agencies can also, establish agency policy as well, similar to this, without going through the whole regulatory process. And so regulatory process can follow this and use this as a precedent. But I think that, one of the important, components of this, is that it's actually this different worldview and the relationships within this worldview, I think that had an impact on having this particular piece in here. And a lot of the agency folks that met with some of the traditional knowledge holders, were really struck about how the knowledge held, from, the Northern Bering Sea, people knew about different migration patterns, the different timing of events. And so it was, a shock to a lot of folks to see that knowledge and to hear about it firsthand. And so I think that this, came in here as an example, just because trying to ensure that, an equitable process, goes through the policymaking arena, is true to traditional knowledge values, I think was quite important. And so I think I'm running out of time here, and I just wanted to, I guess, end there and just thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm happy to answer any questions, and hand it back over to Julie and Jessica for discussion.
Thanks so much, Rachel. That was really awesome. Why don't we just kind of turn it over to the group, you think, Jessica, to see if people have questions first, and if not, we have some questions for you guys as a group.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Or comments, questions or comments.
And thank you again, Rachel, for that presentation. So appreciated. Any questions? Comments? Thoughts?
I do. This is Werner. Could you hear me?
Yes. Yes, Werner.
Thank you, Rachel. That was great. And I'm just so glad that you're on here. And I know that you do great work. And my question was about, so you provided some great examples of where they try to incorporate both sort of traditional knowledge with Western science. And I sort of had experience with that during my time at Bristol Bay Native Association, where there was a study about traditional knowledge and the migration patterns of the Multatna caribou herd, which is very interesting because they also tried to look at Western sort of ways of looking at the weather and seeing how weather patterns influence the caribou herd. And so I feel like there's a bunch of different examples of where it tries, like this approach tries to look at both, where, okay, well, there's obviously a lot of historical traditional knowledge, and that's passed down to our people. And now, with the Western sort of way of observation, those sort of things, is there like a list of how many projects there are, or do you know of like a list of however many projects that sort of try to tie into both of these things? Because I think that if people were able to look into having like a list, looking at a list of, okay, this is being applied in Western Alaska in this context and others. I know that North Pacific Research Board tries to do that with all the projects that they've funded, but I'm wondering if there's more of like a list of incorporating both of them. Sorry, that was a long question.
Hey, Werner, good to see you. And I think that that's a really great question. And I feel like there are, multiple places that might have that information, but I don't think that it's widely accessible. First, I think I've seen a couple of academic reviews that look at different, pieces of this. And many of those aren't accessible to the public at all, right? And so, one challenge is making a lot of those academic lit reviews more accessible. And then the other thing I think is that, a lot of them tend to be, kept in their own silos, right? And I know that as far as like climate adaptation and planning for climate adaptation, there are a couple of good resources, but again, that's like kept, at a, like a separate university and not, necessarily, that works within the climate adaptation field versus taking a more broader look, right, about application of traditional knowledge. And I don't know if Julie has anything else to add to that or not.
Just to say that no, I am not aware of any one clearinghouse that compiles all of those kinds of works, Werner. A lot of times they're regional, like for example, COERIC has most of the stuff that's been done in our region, but which is available for people to look at. But something central would be really valuable, I think.
Thank you. Great presentation.
This is Charlie. I'd also like to say great presentation. Very good work. It's really important. Everybody's area is different in its own way and has special needs. And only way to figure things out and get the equality out there is to understand and know and to know every area. So keep up the good work. I think it's great.
Hey, thanks, Charlie. Much appreciated. And actually, you bring up a good point that I actually had scribbled down in my notes at one point. But I think that that's very important, and that oftentimes a lot of traditional knowledge and indigenous peoples usually are put in one box, right? And so it's important to recognize that there are totally differences, across our regions, and that's oftentimes why it's like indigenous knowledges, because we also have different worldviews and different world systems. But I think that that's a really great point, and I appreciate your bringing that up and sharing it today.
Very welcome.
Hi, this is Donna. This has been great, really helpful. It gets my brain going in a lot of different directions. In a past life, I did a lot of work in the National Environmental Policy Act, and so a couple things come to mind here. One is that in an environmental document, you do consider traditional ecological knowledge. It ends up going in its own section, and it's written by, it's all the data are collected by one person, and they compile it, and it's really hard. It's always been really difficult to pull those pieces of information together, because the people who do that work are very, very conscientious and maintain a lot of confidentiality, which is great, which is what they need to do, but it ends up being summarized to a degree that it's really hard to pull it into the other information that we have to write an environmental impact statement. And so that's kind of one piece of it. And the other part of that is that there's that one person who has that information. Nobody else is there with it, and it's usually a white guy. So you then have this Western knowledge person interpreting traditional ecological knowledge into this document and being the sole interpreter of that information. So that's one piece that I'd just like to throw out there. And then the other part of doing a NEPA analysis is that it requires government-to-government consultation. So this is a federal agency that's working on this environmental analysis, and so they do coordination with other governments, which includes the tribes. And so I have had an opportunity to sit at some of those meetings, but you realize when you're sitting in those meetings how political everything is at the village level, how many different hats individuals wear, and you feel like you're not getting the whole story, because the village corporation, the regional corporation, the tribe, the village government, they all have conflicting needs and wants, and some of those people have a seat at every one of those tables. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as maybe a point of discussion, but it's all very interesting. So thank you for bringing this up.
I think that those are three great points to start off the discussion. I don't know what you guys, Jessica and Julie, think, but I especially like that second point is something that I think, we could probably even spend the rest of the time talking about. I think, and I appreciate your, bringing all of these up. And I think I'll start off by, addressing that second point especially. And I think that, for myself, I think, it's taken a while, as I, grew up, of course, appreciating, where I came from, but then learning, science and, valuing science at the same time, devaluing my own knowledge. And I think, as I grew older, I think that, I've really come to learn that to value my own knowledge, right? And so that's why that's something, it's not only, to non-knowledge holders, but it's to all of us, right? And all of us Indigenous people as well, to value our own knowledge. And, only by us valuing that knowledge, then, it's going to persist. And it's, if we value it, we will take responsibility, we'll carry it through. And I think that, that's something, for myself, that's been really important. But then also, it's equally important to have folks to understand, processes, to ensure that happens. So the right policies, ensuring that, it's not just in NEA and it's not going to be listened and it's not connected to the other, impact statements in NEA. And so I think that I personally feel that there's this, move to help, build capacity, for some parts of the state, in having, more processes that are based on Indigenous values and Indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge values. And I don't know if you, Julie or Jessica or others wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I think that by working closer with communities over time, you're able to better incorporate some of the knowledge systems into these reports. Right now, my people, the Gwich'in, are in the process of consultation over leases and possible development in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And the tribe has taken a very assertive and big role and expressing both verbally and written their desires for next steps and meeting continuously with the federal government to ensure that what's being written and drafted is reflective as much as possible of their desires for sovereignty and self-determination. I also think more time allows for more trust to be built. So I just know, being from the Yukon Flats, there were Western scientists that we had very good relationships with around moose management and other things because they spent a lot of time with us. Did we always agree on everything? No. But then there was other relationships less strong because there was no trust there. It was just like they came in, they kind of like said, oh, there's a lot of problems here, or people are saying different things. And so they sort of like wrote what they wanted and said it was collaborative, and it wasn't. So I just think that time spent allows trust to be built, and it allows for like whatever's written to be more reflective of differing views and knowledge systems. The political part, I think politics is everywhere. Yes, at the village level, but also everywhere. And that's just life. And I think more conversations we can have. One thing, Rochelle, that I really appreciated about your presentation and just the work that you're doing is throughout you said over and over just the importance of the collaborative relationships. And I think the word that you used that I wrote down was the mutually beneficial relationships that were built. So not just like Western scientists learning Indigenous knowledge, but vice versa. Julie, you also explained that too with the Bering Sea project on currents. So I think like as much as we can spend time together, build trust, and really listen, right? Because I think even as like I work at a university, and so I'm very immersed in Western science, but I'm an Indigenous person who was raised in this Indigenous knowledge system, is listening to people with my whole heart and being open to the fact that I have something to learn, I think can be really powerful in advancing, say, fisheries management or sustaining our waterways. So those are just some preliminary thoughts that are floating through my head. Are there other people that have comments or questions? We did lay out some questions in the email that Jennifer sent to you. I can just kind of review them, which are: what questions do you have about traditional knowledge? Have you been in situations where traditional knowledge and knowledge holders were solicited and incorporated? What was the outcome? Can you think of situations you have been in where traditional knowledge and traditional knowledge holders should have been incorporated to produce a better and more equitable outcome? What do you see traditional knowledge and traditional knowledge holders playing? What role do you see them playing in our collective work? So those are just, we just kind of propose those to get your thoughts going, but you can just ask anything or comment on it, because I think it's very productive.
I have a question. This is Katie and Homer. And is there any example in the state of Alaska or elsewhere where tribes have a true voice in management, like a co-management situation?
Is there anybody here who was on the Waslex trip?
I think the Kuskokwim River has co-management right now.
Okay, and how do you have any experience with how that works? Like, do you think that it really is a share in the power and decision making?
From what I understand, it's working pretty well.
Go ahead, Charlie.
I wish Mary Patola was on today. She would shed some more light on it because that's her system over there.
Maybe Rachel, you could comment on that a little bit. You have a lot of experience in the realm of co-management. I would just say briefly, this is Julie, I would just say briefly that from the work I do at COERIC and my experiences with co-management in the Bering Strait region is pretty consensus that co-management in that region is not true co-management, and it does not work well, and it is not equitable by any means. So at least for that part of Alaska, and this is primarily marine mammal co-management that I'm speaking of here, there's a lot of work to be done there, but Rachel, maybe you could say more about that.
Yeah, and I think I alluded a little bit about, co-management, especially as it relates to marine mammals, in that the structure that was laid out, was largely decided, based on Western views and values. And I think that one of the important things and one of the important considerations, if you were truly going to go through a collaborative and equitable process, would be together working through what that system would look like, right? And so, with an understanding about, how you get to management goals, et cetera, right? And so not having only one system decide what those goals are and how, you'll get there, and then just having people come together to talk about, how they're reaching them. And I think that's one of the pitfalls, in a lot of what's called co-management today. And I think I failed to mention this, and it was in my notes, in that Northern Bering Sea Climate Resilience area, there was a tribal advisory council that was going to be established, and they were going to determine who was going to be on it, how they were going to govern, and how they were going to, come to a decision-making process amongst themselves. And unfortunately, that executive order was withdrawn, and so that whole process was stopped. But I think that there's still a need to get there. But I think in part, it's also, and I think Donna talked about this, in your last comments about, in communities we all wear different hats, and sometimes it's hard to take off that hat, and when there's so much being, you're regulated so much, you also want to hold on to what you have, and the marine mammal co-management or the fisheries co-management, regardless, it's all that you have, and you don't want to lose that. And so I think that's also a challenge, and I think what could be of benefit is to have knowledge holders come together to talk about what would our management systems look like, and then to work through the policy process of how do you get those management systems in the overarching framework of how those management systems operate. But that's just my opinion.
I like that. I like that. I hadn't thought of that. Co-management should probably start with the whole outline of what you're trying to do, because if you have one group who's running the whole system and then the other group is supposed to just plug into that and help with one or two management decisions, it's probably not going to work. I studied a little bit about that. There's a lobster fishery on the East Coast where the fishermen now co-manage with the government, and but anyway, I'm always interested in that, because I feel like just listening to the presentation, it's kind of like, you know, I feel like it's kind of this huge struggle to be heard, but if it was set up that certain voices were part of the management, part of the decision, then they would have to be heard more, but that's another issue. But anyway, thanks. That's interesting.
Yeah, thanks for everybody's just comments and questions. And I've been charged with wrapping it up a little bit, which is kind of disappointing in some ways, just because I want to hear from everybody and just your thoughts. And I know like this topic could be semester long. One thing I just want to say is a lot of times when I'm talking with people, I really try to stress what I think Rachel really stressed a lot through her presentation is this idea of, you know, mutually beneficial, collaborative, that I think sometimes the way things are framed, it's almost like, you know, either or, competitive in some way. And I think it's important for us to realize, like, how can we collectively make the best decisions, you know, for our fisheries or for educating our young people. And that's like bringing all voices to the table and not, you know, and I think but the Barnhart-Quigley article was really stressing this, that in education, it has been Western education that's been privileged at the table, but that both knowledge systems are important for the child and that we need to really ensure that all voices come to the table. And so that's kind of why we picked that one, is like they did stress this collaboration, but also ensuring that every voice is in the room and different knowledge systems are offered to children so that they can succeed. And so that's why we picked that article, and we thought it was really powerful. But there's so much more than just that article. And so if you're interested, there is room to drop articles in our portal. So if you know of readings that you've really found beneficial, I encourage you to share them either with Jennifer or put them in the portal. There's several textbooks that are just amazing. Greg Cajete, Indigenous Science, he wrote a very powerful book on that. There's just, there's a lot of articles, and then there's a lot of work forthcoming. So I just want to encourage you to kind of do some of your own reading and learning. And if you have profound thoughts, if you want to, you know, set up a time to talk more, we'd be more than happy to do this. This is just an hour and a half, which it's a lot. We could go a lot more in depth, but just wanted to thank everybody for their time and participation. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Julie and I. And Rachel, can we share your email with the group too? Because I think that would be beneficial.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to like have you know, outside conversations one-on-one too, if you'd like as well. So, and yeah, thanks for having me come and speak. And yeah, I would love to you know, have dialogue with anyone who would like to.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody, and thank you again, Rachel, so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it, and hopefully, you know, we can continue this conversation in Kodiak too. We won't have too much overlap time as two cohorts together, but maybe we can, as individual cohorts, continue this conversation as well. So I look forward to it.
Well, thanks,
Great
everybody. Oh, go ahead. Who was that?
This is Charlie. That was a great presentation, ladies. Thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody. And, you know, it just occurs to me that maybe one thing that could be helpful for furthering this conversation would be if you have specific questions that are floating through your mind right now, or, you know, in the days to come, to share those on Facebook or via email, and that might help Julie and Jessica and Rachel sort of carry the conversation forward. So it's 1:30, and does anybody have any quick issue, topic, question, or anything that they wanted to bring up before we sign off?
This is Ben here. I just want you to know that if you ever want to feel real pain you go through security and have to ditch your small bag of salmon strips.
Oh.
Thanks for the presentation, all. I'm out.
No. Well, that happened to me with a jar of salmon at LaGuardia, and I told the security woman if she was going to take it from me, she had to eat it, and so she decided to give it back to me. Oh my God.
This is Julie, just real quick. I put in the chat box, the Salmon Shadows team from Cohort 1 is having a pop-up art show and community conversation through our Salmon Shadows project on September 1st down here in Girdwood at the library from 6 to 8 p.m. And we'd love to have anyone in the area join us and participate, and look for a Facebook event or something else that you can share and help advertise for us.
Jennifer, this is Mark. Are there activities being planned for Kodiak outside of what we're doing? The reason I'm asking is I know some of the folks at the Seafood Marine Science Center. If we wanted to arrange a tour, I could probably talk to them if there was interest in that.
Yeah, I think we're working on the schedule. It's looking jam-packed with all these little blocks of things, but hopefully jam-packed with larger chunks of time for you guys to get into topics and conversation. And I am interested to hear from you guys in terms of ideas or requests you have for Kodiak. And so I'll put that out on both Facebook and via email. And we will try to incorporate as many of those things as possible. But that's a great suggestion, Mark. So that it's on our radar, but it's helpful to me if you guys flag stuff that is of interest to you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, it sounds like we've reached our endpoint. Everybody's quiet. Thanks again, everybody, for taking the time to be here today, and we will look forward to getting together on Zoom soon. And in the meantime, if you need anything, please definitely feel free to give me a shout. And with that, given the time, I think check-in, maybe like check-in is wave. And thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.